It is a horrible world in which we're living at the moment. But how fearful are you? How worried, how concerned are you? I want to speak to Frank Breheny, who's available to speak to us. Frank, who keeps his eye on travel worldwide and on people's holidays and reports indeed for Holiday Travel Watch and all of that. Frank, good morning.
Hello there, Frank.
It's hard to believe that we're having a conversation like this again, but we now really do have to accept that our major cities are targets, and as a result, people are bound to be fearful.
Well, indeed, Frank, I mean, you and I have talked about this certainly for longer than 12 months on tourism, and, you know, I think what I would say initially is we need to guard against the trap of anger and mantra, and, you know, start, as I've said to you many times on air, start to think about how we protect our areas. It's quite clear in recent years that what we've witnessed is a slow creep of this kind of activity as opposed to the intensity of activity in places like Egypt and Tunisia. And what we're dealing with now are effectively, well, criminals, yes, but shadows in the mist, if you like. And, you know, we have to go beyond the mantra. We have to think, as I said, post the Westminster attack, we have to think about perhaps zoning, like they did in Brussels post the attack. And I pick up on the point you make about surveillance. You know, I'm down to London tomorrow, and, you know, quite frankly, everywhere you go, there's a camera looking at you. We are probably one of the most surveilled societies in the Western world. So I think in some respects we have come to accept that, and we should, you know, perhaps we should accept it, but I think accept it with all the right checks and balances of a civil society.
It's important to keep everything within context, but I would have thought a very simple thing to do now, considering that two of London's most famous bridges have been attacked, would be to put up very simple bollards where a vehicle could not mount the curb. I was across in London a couple of weeks ago. I was walking across Westminster Bridge. I noticed but one withered wreath along one of the lampposts, and that's all there was to remind you of the tragedy that had happened there just a couple of weeks earlier. And I was thinking, it'd be so easy to stop a vehicle mounting that footpath by putting up a bollard, like a very heavy duty plastic bollard filled with water the whole way along, that if a vehicle tried to crash through it, it would bounce back off it. They're bound to take those steps.
Well, do you know, Frank, I was on that bridge exactly a week to the time on the day before that particular attack, and I wrote a bit of an article about tourism and security, and I actually described my walk across that bridge. And as you know, Frank, there are no bollards across that bridge, but then you get close to Big Ben and you have these huge bollards and barriers against the rails of Westminster itself, and then literally no more than 50 metres the bollards stop, and you know, there are no bollards around the Palace of Westminster thereafter until you get up to St. Stephen's Gate, which is a further 100 metres along the way. You're absolutely right. You know, it is reactive, but I think we should become proactive on these issues. You know, whatever I say about zoning our, you know, precious public spaces, practical steps of protecting, you know, key tourist pressure points, you know, where, you know, Westminster Bridge is an excellent example. It's like the crossroads of the world, so to speak. You know, everybody is there. You know, you're facing the selfie stick hurdles, if you like, because everybody wants that pressure shot, you know, to take home with them that they've been at Westminster on that bridge. And you know, it's the same right the way across the river down there. You know, there are plenty of tourists. There are plenty of spots there. We do need to start to think about, whatever about surveillance, we do need to think about the practical steps.
I suppose they could easily drive through a pedestrian precinct in any city and kill as many people as they want. So maybe the other way of looking at it is it's an impossible ask to secure everyone everywhere. But you expect steps to be taken. We were very aware of steps being taken here in Northern Ireland during the 70s, 80s and 90s. Even simple things. People designed the windowsill of their houses in the 1980s in vulnerable areas so as it slanted downwards that people couldn't position a package on the windowsill. It's simple things like that could ensure that it is just more difficult for these terrorists to attack us.
I absolutely agree with you. The mainland, let's put it this way, the mainland could learn a great deal from the people of Northern Ireland. And you may not know, Frank, but I used to be a police officer. I mean, I had to retire because I was injured. But, I do understand the security issues reasonably well. And it is a case, you can never prevent, the lone wolf who wants to go into that crowded shopping centre. But, you can take a great many steps that frustrate the possibility of attacks on those pressure points. And this is where we need to be. That's what happened in Brussels post the attack at the airport and on the metro. And we really do need to pick up the mantle on that particular issue. But also, I also believe, and I believe you, Frank, I'm not making this point lightly, and I understand the sensitivity, but we really do need to move beyond other mantras and start to work with our European partners, because there is an incredible security apparatus at play on or in Europe. And yes, it's not perfect, but it's a darn sight better than what exists in many other countries, and we need to fully engage in that.
I'm going to be talking about surveillance a little later in the programme, and whether or not we'd be prepared for greater surveillance, being tracked, being checked, being observed in a much more overt way than we currently are. Of course, if we send an email, it can be. If they want, they could track it. If we make a phone call, it could be intercepted. All these things could be done, but they're very, very, very strict rules in relation to privacy and, people having, I suppose, a personal presence within society. Do we need to put our hands up and say, let's cooperate more with government and stop being such voices for personal liberty?
I think it's a huge topic, this, but I think the majority of us probably wouldn't object to it, because the majority of us are not engaged in criminal activity. It's as simple as that. But I think it raises very difficult issues, because I went on to become a lawyer, but it raises very difficult issues of civil rights and that right to privacy. And, it seems to me that if we have something like 23,000 people who are apparently on some kind of watch list, that is where the focus should be, not actually with the vast majority of peace-loving people who live on these fair isles.
And finally, Frank, you mentioned you're a former police officer. I was actually aware of that. The reality is serious praise has to be directed towards the police in London over the weekend.
Yeah, I actually was down on the Saturday after the Westminster Bridge attack, and I have to say I found it extremely emotional to see the huge amounts of outpouring of support for the boys and girls in blue, as they say. I think we greatly underestimate the people. They're almost like knights of the modern age, and I think we do underestimate the dangers that they put themselves into. And quite frankly, it's time that they were given due recognition and support.
Frank, thanks for speaking to us this morning. Thank you.